transit plans usually come with transit studies. To figure out what lines you should build and what service you should run on them, you have to actually consider your options. And consider them we do. It seems like we do a ton of studies in the English-speaking world. So much so that sometimes I wonder, are we studying too much? When even some bus lanes require a multi-year environmental impact study to see if the bus lanes, something which will make transit better, is something that the city can bear, you start to question why we're doing this at all. But sometimes too much studying and not enough building and doing creates problems all of its own. Because if you're not going to bother to build most of the time, why bother studying? Let's find out. I'm Reese, and this is RM Transit, a channel about the meta-discourse of building transit where you think other people might be thinking the same thing, but you're not entirely sure. Have you heard of opportunity cost? It's the idea that even when you do something, there's a cost, the things you could have done otherwise. This video is about transit, but it's about more than transit. Cities, countries, and transit agencies need to do studies. But if you've followed something like high-speed rail in the English-speaking world, you'll know that we've done a lot of studies and not a lot of building. Of course, doing a study can help you decide what to build and how to build it. Or if you should build at all, it can help you build better projects and more of them. In many ways, our current obsession with studies is a reaction to building white elephants, hugely expensive projects which don't go all that well used. Think giant parking lot in the Greenbelt. Ultimately, there are a lot of people out there who will go, before you go spending all of that public money on transit, you better make sure it's a good idea. Basically, you get value from studies by avoiding building bad stuff, building good stuff as quickly as possible, and trying to adjust how good a project is so you get more of the good elements and less of the bad ones. You can also value engineer projects, trying to get more for your dollar, considering going elevated when you might otherwise go underground, and maybe building a less opulent station when there's lower passenger demand. Hopefully. But there's a trap. Agencies and governments often realize that steady state is a good steady state, because when people ask, you can say, "We're working on it." Meanwhile, you're only pushing paper and not soil and rock out of the way so you can actually build something. In much the same way, NIMBYs often love studies, because in so much of the world, studying something means you're not building it. Sometimes this is believed to be justified because there is uncertainty. Maybe we aren't building the best thing, and maybe we're overspending. Often, the idea underpinning our study everything mentality is a noble one. But I have strong opinions on this. I think we often overestimate our ability to plan and see the future, and underestimate the value of having the things we're planning, whether that be transit or better cities, sooner so that we can build our societies around them. Few examples could be better than Crossrail. Punted around for decades, people had long talked about the idea of a high-speed cross-city tunnel in London for suburban trains. But was it really a good idea? Tunnels are expensive, you know. Of course though, after the money had been spent, the delays had been had, and the line actually opened, it was an enormous success. In fact, some stations have so many passengers it's creating issues, and the line has stirred up conversation about more transit investment up and down the country. It's had huge positive benefits that we probably aren't even aware of yet. But Crossrail is not alone here. The UK has an incredible tendency to underbuild and not build projects that have been long proposed and seen as positive options. And that's obviously not because everyone wants austerity, simply because I think a certain class of bean counter is uniquely empowered. Look at the DLR, for example. The system was barely thought to be justified when it was originally built, and ever since it has been built, it's been extremely well used. So much so that tons of money has had to be spent upgrading and improving the system, which was not designed to move as many people as it does. And yet, even with the hindsight that the DLR was going to move a ton of people, similar mistakes were made with the Jubilee Line extension, a project with a lot of decisions that cut its capacity and which is completely rammed to the gills with passengers. With this kind of repeated underprediction, you would hope that people's expectations would shift, but we're not getting Crossrail 2 right now, we're getting Superloop. I think it's worth asking who benefits when we do a study. Of course, public agencies and authorities can certainly benefit if a study points them in the right direction, but the people doing the study also obviously benefit. It can also benefit those who are happy with the status quo and inconvenienced by change. A study has become a great way to throw the brakes on a project which might be very successful, but also potentially impactful to the wrong people. In the same way, in the recent past, we've often seen things like environmental assessments and studies weaponized against public transit in places like California. And I think here you can see the crux of the problem. If the macro-level purpose of an environmental study is to improve the environment, then what's the environmental impact of an environmental study that slows down much-needed zero-emissions transit? Similarly, GO Transit and Metrolinx in Toronto have danced around the idea of having a clear plan for the future of regional rail, like how many trains are going to run to where and when. And that's a really bad thing, because if we don't know what the network's meant to look like, we've probably built all kinds of infrastructure that we may not actually need. But what's just as bad is our insistence on seemingly studying every minute difference in service frequency for years while we don't build critical infrastructure like the electrification we're going to need whether we run 7 trains per hour or 17. In other cases, we built entire tunnels that are currently sitting unused because it's not clear we know when trains are meant to use them and how the pieces are meant to fall together. At the cost of a good network today, we're studying the perfect network for a hypothetical future. And so much of this is justified because of fiscal prudence. But what is the opportunity cost of studies? How much high-speed rail might we be able to build if instead of studying again and again, we just got on with building? Probably not a ton, but probably also not nothing. Similarly, if Metrolinx stopped trying to study every possible GO Transit service pattern, especially knowing that our studies are imperfect, and just started doing the first thing necessary to run more trains more often, maybe we might be able to more easily see where our resources were best used, on the routes that turned out to be the busiest and target further improvements. So often we seem to think we're saving tons of money by doing very expensive studies that tell us not to build a minor piece of infrastructure or to run less service. But in places with far too little transit, there is an enormous opportunity cost to not building and running more transit as soon as possible. Not only does building and running the transit have a huge, nearly immediate benefit to the public and our cities, but it might shed light on what we should be building better than any study can, as well as perhaps spur the growth of the next Canary Wharf or Stratford. Alon Levy has this great quote about projects with a high cost-benefit ratio being dubious. Because if something is a great idea, you shouldn't wait for it to become an even greater idea to build it. Once that cost-benefit ratio says build, you should build. This is especially important in a world where projects are costing more and taking longer, because if you feel that the benefits of a project are enormous, you might feel like it's okay for it to cost a lot and take a long time. That's the problem with the English-speaking world. We seem to know the cost of action, but not of inaction. Of course, studies are good, and in many cases a legal requirement, but laws can be changed. We need to keep doing studies because the answers aren't always obvious. But we also have to acknowledge that studies have a diminishing return. They're not better forever, and sometimes you actually just have to take action. We can't predict the future. All I ask you is to try to nudge things in the right direction. So the next time you see another study of the same old project, maybe ask, should we be building? Thanks for watching.